Hello again, and welcome to the channel. Today again we will be talking about Vasa, but this time I would like to address a little bit more about the archaeology, about the publications of the Vasa, and what was my happy time in that ship. If you go to Sweden, if you go to Stockholm, obviously this is the only possible place to start any tours. The ship is a magnificent archaeological site. At the time of sinking, she was only partially equipped. She did not have all her guns, she did not have all her provisions, she did not even have her entire crew. She was supposed to reach the fortress of Vaxholmen in the Stockholm archipelago, where she was supposed to be completely outfitted before she headed out to the summer anchorage at Älvsnabben of the Swedish Navy. At the time of the sinking, Sweden was at war with Poland, and the king kept on pressing the navy to send the ship, to complete the ship as quickly as possible. It is hard to tell exactly why. There was no particularly great strategic reason. It is not clear what the ship was supposed to do. The only thing that we know is that she was supposed to reach Älvsnabben, the summer anchorage of the fleet, and to be the flagship of the reserve squadron. But what was to happen after that, why was the hurry, we do not know. She was part of a group of vessels ordered together from a Dutch shipwright, Hendrickson, who unfortunately died before the ship was completed. In fact, he had barely begun the ship when he died, and it was the foreman of the shipyard that completed her. Two vessels were built to exactly the same specification, the Eplet and the Vasa. Vasa sank 1,200 meters into her maiden voyage. Eplet, on the other hand, survived successfully until 1658-59, when she was intentionally sunk to block one of the approaches to Stockholm. Recently, the ship was a lot in the news since the Swedish underwater maritime archaeological unit did some dives on the vessel and some preliminary documentation. It is, of course, of great interest to compare the structure of the two ships. My connection with Vasa began really in childhood, to tell you the truth. This is what set me up on my course to become a maritime archaeologist. The first time I saw anything about the ship, I was about 3 or 4 years old. And ever since I dreamed, though having been born in a communist country, I did not believe that I'll ever have the chance to see her. And I never ever dreamed that I will actually be working on and inside the ship. The story how I got involved with this really goes back to my master's thesis, in which I discussed framing patterns in the 17th century. Although the information in that thesis continues to be good, and in fact additional archaeological material only confirmed what back then I hypothesized, it is atrociously written. It is pompous, it is hard to read. I recommend the information, I do not recommend the writing. And one day I really need to redo it properly and publish it in a civilized language. The ship, however, is such a rich archaeological site that the final archaeological publication, the complete publication of the vessel, is divided into topics and into a number of volumes. The exact figure changes depending on how the situation is developing, but two of the volumes are really going to be of interest to the viewers of this channel, I suspect, since I believe that the overwhelming majority of the viewers are shipmodelers. So, throughout Dr. Hocker's tenure at Vasa, he initiated a major recording session of the whole ship. The first set of lines that usually you see published was done shortly after the vessel was raised and was as the ship looked at the time. The ship of course has changed over the 40, 50 years now that it has been on dry land. She was never intended to survive as long as she has survived. She was never intended to stand on her keel on dry land for 50 years. So it is only inevitable that some changes have happened. My part of the vessel was to document the framing patterns of the ship. I, to tell you the truth, have made a career of being the third to attempt things. There were two other attempts here. There were two other attempts to excavate shipwrecks in the Black Sea before I began really the serious work there many, many years ago. And Vasa is another such case. We are able to document. The challenge was, of course, figuring out how to track the timbers which are hidden behind the ceiling and the external planking of the vessel. In the 1960s, an attempt was made to follow the prows and the boats of the ship and thus determine how the frames go. But at the time, the person who did this work, trained in modern shipbuilding techniques, assumed that the frames of the ship are perpendicular to the center line of the vessel. She assumed that they are of the same uniform dimensions. Neither of the two assumptions are actually correct. The timbers not only are not even in dimensions, not only are they not perpendicular to the vessels, but they're not even the same numbers on both sides. I will leave this at this point because there is a volume in production that will be addressing all this in greater detail. But that was one of the things that Fred Hocker and I figured out how to document. In fact, I published some years ago an article on the methodology that was utilized in this. Next to me, you see the first volume of the archaeological report on the vessel. The first volume is dedicated to the actual project, to the original archaeology, the original documentation, the original approach to that work. It is monumental, as you would expect from such a huge ship. Obviously, there is a lot to be addressed in it. I am sure that the SYSTER channel will eventually page through the book and give you a better details. One of the interesting features that will be pleasant for ship modelers are the plans redrawn by Fred Hocker that are in the back pocket of the book. They are not the full lines plans. That is likely to come in the ship volume. I would recommend to viewers of this channel to wait towards the end of November and head to the website of the museum for some exciting news that are to be released back then. News for something that we have been waiting for quite a while, actually. But, so what are the volumes going to look like? Besides this one, which is really the introductory volume, they are pretty hefty, as you can see. It may be slightly inconvenient to read them in bed before bedtime, but they're beautifully put together and the information is fantastic. Fred Hocker is an incredible writer. He makes even dull topics sound exciting and interesting. This one is edited by Fred Hocker, but much of it was originally based on the notes and initial writings of Karol of Söderlund, who excavated the ship at the time. The second volume is going to be dedicated to the rigging of the vessel, but it really involves much more than this. It is also going to address the sailing, the process of rigging. How was the ship actually set up originally in the 17th century? How did the 17th century seamen set up the rig, send up the tops, the mast caps, and all this in the process of outfitting the ship. I have seen some of the chapters in the past when they were still under editing, and it is truly fascinating. I'm waiting for that volume to come out. It will be required reading for most of my students who are taking especially methods of maritime archaeology or general history of seafaring, because this is going to be the ultimate final word on the subject of how such ships operated, how were they rigged, how were they set up, and all this explained in the light of specifically the Vasa and the very, very rich base of information that we have. In the near future, we hope, another volume will be dedicated entirely to the hull construction and to the sequence of building the ship, to the frames, etc. of the vessel. That is the volume which I will be one of the contributing authors. We all are hoping that we will complete the work fairly soon. In fact, I'm hoping to head back to the ship soon to complete some of the documentation. But these are really the two volumes that shipmodelers would be interested in, because they are going to be addressing the details. When I was recording the frames, when I was working on the ship, after the first 3-4 months, when I had marked them, when I had completed about 1/3 of the bottom of the vessel, the floor timbers in other words, at the lunch that Fred and I had and discussed how we are progressing, I pointed out that I'm going to be the most hated man among shipmodelers. Why, you may well ask? Well, because I have come to the conclusion that it is virtually impossible to build a truthful frame model of the ship. The timbers are too shaky, too different in dimensions, and I'm speaking about significant variation. In other words, each of the timbers, the shipmodelers will have to prepare a separate blank from which to cut it and to trim the dimensions to every single blank. And what about those that are not even straight lines? The entertainment value is going to be immense, even before you reach the stage of the carvings. So, with this, I wish you all the best. By all means, ask me questions. I shall be delighted to answer them. Like, subscribe, comment. I do read the comments, and I do my best to answer them whenever I can in between work. But I shall be happy to keep an eye on what questions arise around Vasa. And by all means, make your way to the ship, because it is one of the incredible archaeological discoveries of the world. I'm not the most religious of people. The first time I saw Vasa in 2003, I really had a religious experience. This was like entering a medieval cathedral. It is something that you have to experience. It cannot be described. And to work inside her, to live inside her for all practical purposes, no words of mine can possibly describe what this is. So I shall ever be grateful to Dr. Fred Hocker and to the Vasa Museum for the incredible opportunity and chance in life that they gave me, and for their voting confidence in my ability to document the frames. I shall ever be grateful to them. Goodbye, and I hope to see you soon on the channel again.